speaker, Professor Dr. Pratap Sharan sir. Sir has accepted our invitation for this talk on an interesting topic, how to reduce, prevent and cope stress during research. We feel very fortunate to have him because he has very points of view. So, Professor Dr. Pratap Sharan sir, MD in Psychiatry, PhD, currently is a professor with the Department of Psychiatry, All India Institute of Medical Science, New Delhi, where he also officiates as the professor in charge of Student Welfare Service. He has previously worked as medical officer at the WHO Geneva from 2002 to 2004 and faculty member at the Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research, Chandigarh from 1995 to 2005. He is a member of WHO International Advisory Group for the revision of ICD-10 mental and behavioral disorder from 2009 to 2018, and International Advisory Group for Training and Implementation for ICD-11 mental, behavioral and neurodevelopment disorder from 2018 to onwards. He is also a member of the WHO Working Group on Eating Disorder for the revision of ICD-10 mental and behavioral disorder and the Field Studies Coordination Group. He has served as the president of the Indian Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health as the editor of the Association Journal. He is the vice president of the Indian Association for Social Psychiatry. He is a senior editor for the Journal of Eating Disorders and associate editor for National Medical Journal of India. He has conducted research in collaboration with WHO Geneva, WHO East Southeast Asia Regional Office, New Delhi, and Indian Council of Medical Research, New Delhi, and has authored over 200 papers, monographs, books, and chapters. His main areas of interest are public mental health, occupational mental health, psychotherapy, psychometry, cultural issue in psychiatry, and classification of mental disorders. Yes, this is all about our speaker, Professor Dr. Pratap Sharan sir. So I would like to invite our speaker, Professor Pratap Sharan sir, which for we are waiting for. Before starting, we also have session for asking questions. Please type your question in the chat box. We will read your question at the end of the chat. So please don't disturb during the talks. So I would like to invite our speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Lalchand and Dr. Monica Sharma. I am Pratap Sharan and I'm professor in charge of psychiatry at AIIMS. What I'll try to do is to keep the talk rather technically simple so that we can have a discussion when you are ready. Okay. I'm going to talk on how to reduce, prevent, and cope with stress during research. When we think about research, most of the time we when we talk of stress, usually we feel that stress comes from outside, and But if you look at the definitions of stress that are there in the literature, it would suggest that stress can also be seen as something which is a response. Like if you talk of adjustment disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder, or even when a person says that I'm tense or I'm stressed, that suggests that stress can be seen as something internal to a person. But probably the more accurate view is to see stress as a dynamic process. It reflects both internal vulnerability. So there are some people who are likely to become more stressed than others when they face the same kind of external stressor. But stress also depends on the external factors. Like if, let's say you have lost a small amount of money, will not feel very stressed, but if you have lost a lot of money, you will feel more stressed. So stressor itself can be variable. And similarly, if people have good support, they may not get stressed with the same amount of an external stressor. Like for example, again, if a person loses 5 lakhs, a person without any savings, for him that stressor is a big stressor. While if a person has crores in his bank or in property, loss of 5 lakhs may not be catastrophic for that person. So it suggests that stress is an internal, external, as well as an interactive process. Like, for example, suppose your guide is known to one of your earlier mentors. It's quite possible that if the guide is unhappy with you, they will scold you. But if the earlier mentor intervenes, they may become less kind of toxic in that way. This is an internal, external, as well as an interactive process. Like, for example, suppose your guide is known to one of your earlier mentors. It's quite possible that if the guide is unhappy with you, they will scold you. But if the earlier mentor intervenes, they may become less kind of toxic. They will scold you, but if the earlier mentor intervenes, they may become less kind of toxic. Effect of stress on the body on body and mind can be seen. Like people can have bodily symptoms like fatigue, aches and pains, insomnia, palpitations, tremor, sweating, etc. Or they may have effect of stress on the body on body and mind can be seen. Like people can have bodily symptoms like fatigue, aches and pains, insomnia, palpitations, tremor, sweating, etc. Or there's a lot of disturbance. Effect of stress on the body on body and mind can be seen. Like people can have bodily symptoms like fatigue, aches and pains, insomnia, palpitations, tremor, sweating, etc. Or there's a lot of disturbance. Effect of stress on the body on body and mind can be seen. Like people can have bodily symptoms like fatigue, aches and pains, insomnia, palpitations, tremor, sweating, etc. Or a lot of disturbance. Right. Can you hear me now? Okay. So similarly, people can have mental symptoms like confusion or indecisiveness, or emotional symptoms like anxiety, worry, sadness, etc. Sometimes they may have change in their behaviors, like they may start eating less or eating more, or they may start smoking or drinking. And some people may go for more of social media use. When we a large survey, probably the largest survey of researchers, full-time researchers, in mainly in UK, it showed that about 78% felt that the level of competition was very high. 71% felt a lack of career security, and 51% were insecure in their current jobs. 57% said that the workplace had very long hours culture at the workplace, so everyone is expected to work for long periods of time. 53% complained about lack of adequate funding, and 46% were worried that the competition is becoming so tough now that people are ready to cut corners to be able to publish faster, for example. The same study also found that 61% of researchers had said that they had witnessed bullying or harassment of people during their careers, and 43% had experienced it. Similarly, 46% said that they had witnessed discrimination, for example, on the grounds of gender or race, and 35% said that they had experienced it. 1/3 of people had actually sought professional help at some point during their career for depression or anxiety, and almost all of them felt that psychological well-being was fundamental to an effective working environment. Similarly, a survey of PhD scholars by the same organization, but about 3/4 of this group was based in UK. The other 1/4 was all over the world. It showed that 45% of PhD scholars started becoming less satisfied as they went deeper into their program, while a slightly smaller percentage became more satisfied as their work progressed. Most researchers were working for more than 8 hours per week, and people who were working more than 8 hours per week were usually 8 hours per day were dissatisfied with their work hours. About 36%, again, which is similar to the full-time researchers, had sought help for anxiety and depression caused by their studies, and only 1/4 of the people who needed help were getting it from their institution. So even in developed countries, people who need help often do not have help available to them. And 40% people were dissatisfied with their work-life balance. 21% had experienced harassment or discrimination during the PhD period. Another 21% had experienced bullying. And bullying and harassment experience was more common in women as compared to men. And worrying thing is that more than 50% of the people who had experienced bullying, they were afraid of reporting it because they expected that there would be personal repercussions. We have done some focus groups at AIIMS, and some of the areas where problems seem to be there in the Indian working environment is definitely funding and resources, especially for people who have children or parents. Researchers said that there was a lot of problem with bureaucratic processes and delays. The fellowships often were too low, and since research careers are kind of slow to build up, most people had a feeling that they were not settled in their lives. Many were spending out of their pocket for doing research work which was assigned to them, because waiting for chemicals to arrive, for example, would delay things so much that it would become stressful in itself. Some of the students, particularly PhD students or researchers, said that there was inadequate planning for their research, like objectives were changed midways, or certain research processes were put in as a part of protocol which was not actually tried out earlier, and so there were difficulties with that. There was a lack of discussion with the guide. Then there also some complaint about guides biases, and that the supervisor's bias affected their work, or sometimes their publication credit, that they did more work and someone else got the credit for that. They also raised issues about lack of cooperation between labs and between various cadres of workers. The effect of this kind of stress was that many had difficulties with sleep or missing meals, long work hours, which were stressful also because of multiple deadlines, the fact that there were disruptions, for example, if chemicals were not arriving. They said that they had very little physical activity, no time for hobbies, and no time for leisure activities. Many had physical issues like back pain or eye strain. Some had gained weight, and some ladies mentioned that there were menstrual issues like pain, etc. Many of the participants mentioned that there was poor work-life balance and very poor work satisfaction because the prolonged heavy schedules had impacted participation in important areas of life. They could not go for festivals with their families. They could not take care of the children adequately. They could not take care of the parents on a day-to-day kind of a way. And at the workplace, they said that one of the major problems was there was a lack of a proper framework, and it was not very clear what are the objectives of a PhD degree or what the projects were. How research should be conducted at AIIMS is something which is not clearly defined. And many people also mentioned that they were worried about how their careers would progress further, and particularly about employment.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Please, sir,
Yeah.
put your slides on the slides view, actually, sir. A student having some problem because they can't see clearly. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we move to the coping issues, and there are 8 dimensions of wellness. We'll see if this works. Yeah. There are 8 dimensions of wellness. These are called emotional dimension, the spiritual dimension, the intellectual, the physical, environmental, financial, occupational, and social dimensions. And coping methods basically some of the basic methods are that one has to take care of oneself, like eating adequately, regularly, exercising regularly, getting adequate amount of sleep and at proper times, talking to others like parents, friends, counselors, or doctors, not only in general terms, but if a person has problems, they should be discussing their problems. They should be discussing their feelings about those problems and how they are coping. And based on this, the person that they're talking to, they might be able to help them either manage the problems directly or help them manage their feelings, or maybe help them change the way they are coping with the thing in ways which are more healthy. It's usually useful to avoid drugs and alcohol because they may seem to help initially. Like if a person is very anxious or very stressed, a couple of pegs of alcohol may make them relax. But if this becomes a habit, then one tends to become dependent on the alcohol or drugs, and that leads to like people who are using alcohol regularly, for example, tend to start becoming depressed because of that directly. So those complications will ultimately increase stress. Apart from that, there may be problems with intoxication, there may be problems with poor concentration. So it may relax initially, but in the long run, it usually kind of adds to problems. It's useful to take breaks, not only from work, but also sometimes, like if in the Corona times, for example, if you are watching too much of TV, sometimes that gets stressful. And it may be important to take breaks and see news only at regular intervals, maybe for about an hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening, but not more than that in general. The other important thing is that one should recognize when help is required, and the two kind of ways of recognizing that is that if suppose you are feeling low or if you're feeling anxious for weeks together, or if that anxiety or sadness or feeling of being stressed is affecting your work or relationships, uh, those are the times when you should take the help of a professional counselor. Uh, a word about exercise, because this is something which is relatively easy to fit into most people's schedules. Exercise increases release of endorphins, which makes you feel good, and it regulates blood circulation, breathing pattern, and decreases cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So it's been found now with many studies that exercises improves mood state and anxiety, and actually it may be used as a treatment for mild depression or mild anxiety disorders. So even at pathological level of depression and anxiety, exercise may work independently or as adjuvant. The recommendation is that one should exercise for about 150 minutes in a week. If one is doing moderate intensity aerobics, and for about 75 minutes a week if one is doing vigorous intensity aerobic exercises, which means about 30 minutes a day for moderate and 15 minutes a day for vigorous intensity exercise. Another useful method which all of us it's a part of the Indian tradition is yoga. It improves attention and concentration. It relaxes the muscle, and it may improve immunity. So it works not only with stress, anxiety, and depression, but also with certain chronic illnesses. It can improve physical, and it doesn't only kind of get you to feel better when you're down. If you are feeling normal, it can get you to feel even better. So it's something which can promote health also. At the level of systems, the AIIMS focus group discussion suggested that there is a need to have guidelines at the level of the institute as to, for example, what is expected from PhDs, how long it should take, how big the volume of work should be, how many times the guide should be meeting a person, how the objective should be decided, who will decide the topic, and so on. So the basic idea is that if there is framework, then it doesn't depend entirely on the whims of one person, and one can refer to the guidelines, and in case things are not moving reasonably according to guidelines, one can refer back to them and get course correction done with the help of people who are supposed to be implementing the framework. They also suggested that there's a need for better management systems, like the funding should be organized in a way that people don't have to run from pillar to post. There should be regular mechanisms to see that the work is progressing in an orderly manner, and if it is not happening that way, then timely checks should be done so that things can be altered and it doesn't become too stressful towards the end of the work period. Many people suggested that there is a need for centralized labs so that people from different labs could, at least for some of the common processes, there should be centralized labs. And people don't have to go from one lab to the other, where someone may say that you have access for half an hour, or someone may say that you have access on this day, but not on that day, and deny them the ability to do the work. And the PhD students particularly mentioned that there should be an orientation program or a pre-PhD coursework of a short duration, which familiarizes scholars with different labs, different work environments, techniques, scopes, and areas, so that they can choose their PhD more based on what is available and also based on what they would like to work on. Some people emphasize the need for time management and stress management classes, and on the social side, many people mention that there's a need for unit and departmental get-together so that people get to know their colleagues better, because researchers often work in isolation. The UK group that I had mentioned initially, they have made suggestions regarding the overall research culture itself. So they say that the need to change the research culture would require a collective action at all levels, which includes the funding bodies. It includes the bodies like ICMR, which should be supporting early career researchers through, like, for example, specific grants. They should have systems in place for training or strengthening the managing and mentoring of young researchers, like research methodology classes or workshops on how to apply for funding, maybe mentors who can help people in obtaining funding, and so on. Similarly, there should be policies in place for deterring bad behavior like harassment or discrimination, and procedures which ensure that researchers are safe in the place that they're working, and there should be policies on good practice. So the handling of stress is not only an individual activity, it is an activity which is also at the level of the institutions and also at the level of the governance, where bigger bodies like DST and ICMR, they also have a role to play in ensuring that people level of stress is less. I will briefly speak about balancing family with career in research, because I suppose some of you at least would have children. And if you look at the source of work-related stress, there are multiple sources. And the worst part of it is that some of the stresses are getting more, in the sense that competition is becoming more. There's information overload. The work hours are going up, and sometimes the supervisors or people in senior positions, they don't realize the amount of extra work that people of this generation need to do as compared to people in the previous generation. Like, for example, when I was a student, it was difficult to get enough material to do a seminar. And the skill used to be about how to go about collecting information. While the skill now, you have an information overload, and the skill now is about how to make it more manageable. So so it's quite possible that I might be, when I'm trying to guide my student to do a review of literature, I might be focusing on expanding the search, while what we need to do is to do a search in such a way that it can be finally organized and compressed better. So sometimes our skills at guidance are different from what is actually required. Along with the work demands, there is increase in family demands also. Like, for example, there is increase in housekeeping and childcare responsibilities. Like, most families now, both partners are working, and so they have less time for family duties. Even tougher is people who have double careers. Like, suppose one person is in kind of a research work where he works 60 hours, and the partner is working in a stable job which is kind of 9 to 5. It's easier to manage that kind of a couple relation as against two people who may be working for 72 hours a week. So double careers are tougher than just two people working, and double careers are becoming common amongst researchers. Almost 30% of researchers all over the world have this kind of a family situation. The problem with the double career one particularly is that if such couples have children, a child's day is much shorter than the day of a researcher, and that makes it even more difficult to organize it. And modern education and social life of children is becoming more demanding, because to keep them busy, you have to you have to plan, drive, wait for them to finish activities. They have to go to painting classes, then they have to go to sports. They have to. So there are lots of things which need to be done. And since it's not about just sending them downstairs with and people playing together, you need to be active in getting all these things organized. You have to leave them at crash at a certain time. You have to pick them at a certain time. If they fall ill, you have to go suddenly into the school to pick them up, and so on. Also, the cost of such activities is high, and because of that, it becomes difficult to hire help for other kind of things. So you have to budget also according to the needs of the child. And one thing which needs to be emphasized, or is kind of known but needs to be emphasized, is that childcare demands are higher for the main caregiver, which is usually the mother. The consequences are that it's difficult to remain scientifically competitive while finding fulfillment as a parent and a partner. And this is also tougher for female scientists, and it's tough, even more tough for double career families. And because of all these reasons, some young researchers move by postponing a family. But for women, it can lead to problems in pregnancy, and that will have impact on quality of life. Some researchers may become demotivated and may be forced to decide on whether family comes first or career comes first, and they may be leaving mid-career. And that's why you find very few women reach high-level positions in academia, because many of them settle for less demanding jobs, even though they might be as competent. In some people, there is a development of workaholism. Like we know of one lab in Brazil where there were 32 people working in that lab, and 26 of them were married to each other because they just couldn't step out of the lab except perhaps to go to sleep. So with workaholism, usually there is narrowing of social interaction, and people lose in their commitment to other social commitments, and it may lead to long-term problems in parent-child relationships or the children's emotional well-being and development. The solutions at work is to organize. So you should be organizing days, weeks, and months. You should anticipate deadlines. You should make to-do lists, which are done in such a way that they are doable. And these lists should include family items as well as personal items. One should learn to delegate effectively. This is one of the most important skills that one has to learn if one has to function in a balanced manner. So one can delegate administrative things to people who can do those kind of works. One can delegate scientific things to people who can do those kind of works, and or to technical staff if certain things are doable. So you have to recognize who's the person who can be delegated work, and you have to learn to kind of motivate them and give them incentives that they do your work in a way which you don't have to micromanage. Otherwise, micromanaging itself can take a lot of time. And sometimes if juniors are doing it wrong, then you might have to kind of work even more to correct the problem first and then do it again. So this is a skill set which needs to be learned. One has to also learn to say no. So if there are too many assignments coming up, one should be able to say that, okay, I can't do this one. At home, there is the need to learn to have recreation, some time of work for family responsibilities, as well as quality time, some me time. One should share family responsibilities so that the daily chores are divided. Specific duties are also not only divided, but there is a need to chart out the things, because often if both people are working, then if things are not charted, then there are mismanagements that occur. Help from others, which is similar to delegating at workplace. If you can get helpers, it obviously is useful. Again, anticipating deadlines and travel times are important, because if one person travels, the other person needs to do more work, and sometimes that would need organization. And ultimately, you should share your work excitement and sorrows with your partner. In balancing work and family life, there is a differences in the way men and women look at this. There may be difference in how they distribute family chores, how they plan their travel, the guilt that they feel when they travel out. Do they find what are their attitudes to finding time for themselves, and how they look at the issue of whether family is more important or career is more important. I'm not going into these details, but we can take up this later when if we have time. Right, thank you. Apart from the things that people do for themselves, institutional support is also important. That employers must accept that having and educating children is a meaningful task, and that it can lower the scientific performance for some years. So suppose you have to choose an institution and both your double career people, for example, or you should be looking at institutions which has childcare facilities either on site or nearby. That we should be looking at whether they will be providing maternity, paternity leave or not, and whether suppose you're working on tenure grants, whether they will allow extensions based on children's needs or not, whether the institution offers part-time work or flexible hours, whether it's possible to reduce teaching load. So these are kind of things that you could find out or negotiate at the time of joining in case those negotiations are possible. Of course, we know that there are many places where negotiations may not be possible at all. At a more system-wide level, probably there is need for kind of a system which allows for reintegration research after prolonged breaks. Like, for example, if a lady has has stopped working as a researcher for 2 years to take care of a young child, it should be possible to get career break grants for mothers or grants that take into account maternity or paternity leave. So if you have been on leave for 6 months, the grant should be extendable by another 6 months. So that kind of a thing will come from grant giving agencies or funding agencies. So some of these ideas you could take up at a society-wide level, at the level of your, for example, the Society of Young Scientists or the National Society, to demand that some of these things should be added to systems. As I mentioned, that dual careers are more demanding because, and it's becoming very common. It offers certain advantages to institutions and also for researchers, but it makes it difficult for people to get that. If two people are researchers, getting a job in the same city or in the same institution might become difficult, particularly because science has now become very, very, you go into very kind of niche areas. So getting two niche areas in the same institutions may sometimes be very difficult, or even in a city sometimes may become very difficult. So suppose you are a couple like that, you may probably start by getting information on the type of support that you can get in the place that you have applied for, whether they support dual career hiring. What has been found is that usually dual career hiring works best if both partners are well qualified, and usually the second hire is at a slightly junior level. So if you're looking for a place where two people get very senior positions or even moderately senior positions, that's going to be tougher than if both people are applying for junior position, or one is applying for one particular level and the other is applying for a lesser level. It's good to get information on written policy, because sometimes otherwise biases work. Like there have been places where I and my wife have applied and we have been rejected simply because we will not take two couples together. So we will not take a couple together without any policy being there, but you can't challenge it because there is no policy around it. The partner issue should also be raised during negotiation with the institution so that they are aware of it. And many institutions, as I mentioned earlier, they find it useful because if couples are taken, then there is a greater gender equality. There is usually some greater amount of diversity. And if couples come together, they are committed to institutions for both because they feel a sense of commitment to it, but also because it's difficult for both of them to live together. So there are advantages for the institution also, as well as for the researcher, for whom it is about quality of life, as well as when they can work in a concentrated manner, their performance also improves. Very briefly into clinical management, there are a number of psychotherapeutic approaches. Sometimes medicines are required and one could use them. I just briefly mentioned the CBT because what CBT basically suggests is that sometimes one can change stressful situations. So it's not always that if there is stress, you should go and relax or you should do yoga. The better way of managing a stress is to remove the stress altogether. So if you can manage your money better, if you can manage your time better and set personal goals, that may work. If you can express your wishes firmly and get, let's say, a guide to change the objective in line with what you want the objective to be, for example, that will cause you less distress, and so you don't really need to de-stress yourself otherwise. But when situations cannot be changed, then you have to change your thinking, look at things more positively, see problems as opportunities, negate negative thoughts, and keep a sense of humor. So these are some of the things which use CBT principles and can be done at a individual level without necessarily having training. In sum, the prevalence of mental ill health in researchers is higher than peers in the general population. So people who have simpler careers, they will have less distress, but it is not higher than other professional students or full-time professionals. So, for example, researchers may have similar level of mental distress as doctors or engineers or lawyers. It is established that many stress factors are associated with research, and but the problem is not only that there are stress factors. The other problem is that researchers don't know how to take help. So they will often not approach anyone for help when they need it. And some of the reason for that is that that the services which provide help may not be kind of available, or they may not be adequately advertised. So we have gradually felt the need to shift towards tailored services to reduce as well as protect people from risk. And we are trying to develop practices of how to manage stress researchers and trainees in a more professional and organized manner. For example, at AIIMS, we are running a counseling service, which is there from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. to kind of take from the 7 to 9 zone as well as the 5 to 7 zone when people may be able to come to the center. And there is a mobile helpline as well as email which is available. The mobile helpline has changed. These numbers have changed right now. So in conclusion, to manage stress, you should learn to identify stress, which may be at individual level, which may be at institutional level, or it may be at a system-wide level. You have to look for possible solutions, discuss them with other people, and ultimately try to find balance in between what is fulfilling and not overdoing it either. In the end, you have to remember that success is about your own criteria. So in life, you become successful based on your criteria, and it is not based on who has more publications or who has more research grants. So like if you have a lot of research grant and your child goes wayward, you may not find that as a very kind of balanced solution. So you have to define your own criteria and work around it, and it's quite possible that when you care about your criteria, you will feel less stressed. So this is what I wanted to share, and we can take up any questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very informative lecture by you, sir. It was brainstorming session with you, sir. During his session, sir has covered reasons of stress and ways of coping with the stress. Reason of stress can be vary person to person, and how to manage dual careers. So it was really interesting session with you, sir. So now I will invite the researcher scholars. If you have any question, you can ask to sir. Sir, Satyapal is having a question. He's asking, what are the symptoms of a stressed person? Like behavior, how they can identify like this people or this person is in a stress, like by his behavior, face reaction, or way of talking.
Right. symptoms, so to say, would be at a psychological level. So a person would say that he or she is anxious or is depressed, or simply that he's feeling tense or stressed. So let's say the bulk of people with stress may not show it in the behavior. They will show it in the verbal behavior. So if you talk to them, you will get to know. The next set of issues, the expressions may be about, like, you may find that they are sweating very easily, or their body appears very tense, or they become very restless, they fidget, their hands are moving or fingers are moving, they cannot sit still in the chair. So those kind of behaviors may come next. Then you may have autonomic symptoms like sweating or palpitations and those kind of things. And sometimes you may also notice that a person is stressed by, if they're, for example, doing behaviors like taking too much of substances, like smoking too much, or drinking alcohol very regularly. So if their behaviors are out of ordinary, then you kind of guess that they are stressed. But the confirmation is in talking to the person and getting to know for sure.
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, I Sasian Kumar. I'm working in ICMR lab as a PhD student. सर मेरा एक क्वेश्चन था सर आपसे सर. सर जैसे हम रिसर्च करते हैं और सर गाइड का जैसे प्रेशर भी रहता है कि भाई काम करो, और दूसरा कि कुछ ऐसा भी होता है कि काम हमने कर लिया है सर, वो चेक नहीं कर पा रहे हैं, और ऊपर से सर ह्यूमिलिएट कर रहे हैं सर. तो कभी कभी सर जैसे अभी एक केस हुआ है सर IIT में सर, यहाँ गुवाहाटी में सर, सुसाइड का सर. तो सर तो इस तरह के ख्याल कैसे आते हैं कि सर हम कि सब कुछ छोड़ दें सर, सुसाइड कर लें, या इस तरह के कभी कभी आते हैं सर.
राइट. सुसाइड जो है, मतलब दैट इज, मतलब उसके पीछे फैक्टर्स जो हैं वो साइकोलॉजिकल भी हो सकते हैं, बायोलॉजिकल भी हो सकते हैं, और सोशल भी हो सकते हैं. जैसे कि अपने एग्जांपल अभी दिया कि अगर काम कोई कर रहा है और उसको प्रोग्रेस उसकी ब्लॉक हो रखी है बहुत लंबे टाइम से, तो दे मे फील फ्रस्ट्रेटेड एंड दे मे, मतलब जब फ्रस्ट्रेट होते हैं तो जो प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग बिहेवियर है वो करने की जगह पे a person may go into other behaviors which expresses the distress, but it may not solve the problem in a straightforward manner. Now ये भी हो सकता है कि अगर उसने सुसाइड की बात करी तो कोई जाके उसके गाइड को बता देगा, और गाइड फिर थोड़ा सा संभल जाएगा कि भाई प्रॉब्लम ज्यादा हो रही है इसको. पहले उसने हो सकता है सोचा ना हो कि इतनी प्रॉब्लम हो रही है. बट मतलब सोशल फैक्टर्स के अलावा कभी कभी लोगों के, जैसे कुछ लोगों को आप देखेंगे जो बहुत जल्दी फ्रस्ट्रेट हो जाते हैं. मतलब जो एग्जांपल आप दे रहे हैं वो है कि बहुत वेट करा उसके बाद हुआ, लेकिन कुछ लोग जैसे हैं सुसाइडल वैसे भी हो सकते हैं कि उनको अगर उनके काम को किसी ने थोड़ा भी क्रिटिसाइज कर लिया तो उनको बहुत गुस्सा आ जाता है कि मेरे काम को क्रिटिसाइज कैसे किया. तो कुछ लोगों की पर्सनैलिटी में वो वाली बात होती है कि वो क्रिटिसिज्म सह नहीं पाते, या उनका मूड बहुत जल्दी अप डाउन हो जाता है. तो कुछ लोग सेल्फ हार्म उसकी वजह से भी कर सकते हैं. दैट मे बी साइकोलॉजिकल इन इस नेचर. दूसरी चीज है कि अगर स्ट्रेस बहुत लंबे टाइम तक चले किसी के दिमाग में, तो उसके दिमाग में कॉर्टिसोल लेवल, मतलब कॉर्टिसोल स्टिमुलेटिंग हार्मोन रिलीज होना शुरू होता है. एंड व्हेन CRH गोज अप, इट कॉजेस चेंजेस इन द न्यूरोकेमिकल लेवल्स इन वेरियस पार्ट्स ऑफ द ब्रेन. और उसके वजह से फिर जो सेरोटोनिन और नॉरएपिनेफ्रिन सिस्टम्स हैं वो मतलब डीरेंज हो जाते हैं. और सो प्रोलॉन्ग स्ट्रेस कैन कॉज बायोलॉजिकल डिप्रेशन. सो मेनी पीपल हु आर सुसाइडल में, मतलब कुछ लोग जो है सो उनको मतलब दिमागी तौर पे उनके जो न्यूरोकेमिकल सिस्टम चेंज हो जाते हैं उसके वजह से वो सुसाइडल हो रहे होते हैं. आमतौर पे जिनके दिमाग में न्यूरोकेमिकल चेंजेस आ जाते हैं वो लोग प्लान्ड सुसाइड करने के चांसेस उनके बढ़ जाते हैं। जो लोग फ्रस्ट्रेट जल्दी होते हैं उनके जो है सो इम्पल्सिव सुसाइड करने के चांसेस ज्यादा होते हैं। So there are, suicide is not a one short answer. It is a multi-determined process. Okay, Monica Luthra has asked me what is the stress level in IIT. I think it will be similar to AIIMS, except for one thing, that IIT is a bigger organization and they have probably more better established systems available there. So from a system perspective and institutional perspective, maybe there may be slightly less stress. The AIIMS, क्योंकि बहुत सारा क्लिनिकल काम भी साथ में चल रहा होता है, बहुत सारा रिसर्च टीचिंग, मतलब इतनी सारी चीजें मिल मिला के चल रही होती हैं कि यहाँ पे systems don't operate as well as they do in IIT.
Okay, sir. And now next question is, bipolar disorder is related to stress or depression?
Bipolar disorder जो है, if you look at depressive disorder, that occurs in about 10 to 15% of general population, and many of the people who are depressed may be said to also be stressed. Let's say half of the depression is because of psychosocial factors, and the other half of depression is largely because of biological factors. So stress and depression are linked to each other. जो biological depression है उसका एक subset जो है, let's say about 5% of people who have depression, उनमें से करीब 20-30% people, that is about 2% of the overall population, tends to have depression at one time, and they may have hypomania or mania at other times. So bipolar disorder is closer to biological depression, and it is less related to stress. It probably happens much more because of problems in the neurochemical structure of the brain, the neurochemical system of the brain.
Okay, sir. Next question is that, before pandemic, most of the researchers were focused on their research, means their research, that experiment was going on and all. But now during this COVID-19, all the research lab are closed. So during this pandemic, they how to cope up with that stress level?
पैंडेमिक के जो स्ट्रेसर्स हैं वो अलग अलग टाइप के हैं। एक पैंडेमिक का जो स्ट्रेसर है वो कोविड से डायरेक्टली रिलेटेड है कि अगर आपको इन्फेक्शन हो गया तो आपको क्वारंटीन करेंगे या आपको आइसोलेशन में डालेंगे, या आपको अगर इन्फेक्शन एक्चुअल हुआ है तो उस समय द एंजाइटी दैट इट मे लीड टू अ सीरियस इलनेस. So that is one set of problems which are directly linked to the infection itself. Another set of stresses around COVID is the social isolation and lack of movement. So अब जैसे लोगों से नहीं मिल पा रहे, जो leisure time activities हैं उनमें से बहुत सारी बंद हो गई हैं, आप शॉपिंग नहीं जा सकते हैं. So that restriction of productive activities which kind of keep a person feeling happy, a lot of those activities have come down. So that is the second kind of stresses. Another kind of stressor can be the amount of social media exposure कि हर समय COVID की बात हो रही है, so that can add to stress. Another set of stress is what you're mentioning, is that if your work is not progressing the way you want the work to progress, and the way to handle that would be to be able to discuss with the institutional authorities about how they will deal with it. अभी जैसे in the initial part of it, they're just saying कि अच्छा हम देख लेंगे, 2 महीने के लिए अब delay कर देते हैं, but they will have to develop a proper system of how to emerge from it when they emerge. Both as दोनों चीजें हैं, जैसे कि system से मतलब है कि अगर आप रिसर्च का जो लैब है वो कैसे खुलेगा, उसकी सेफ्टी को इंश्योर करना है और लैब को चलाना भी है, दोनों चीजें करनी है। उसके बाद में अगर किसी की ग्रांट्स जो है वो 3 साल में खत्म हो रही है, तो जब 3 साल खत्म हो गए तो नेगोशिएट कैसे करेंगे? विल द पर्सन हैव टू गो एंड नेगोशिएट विद बाय देमसेल्व्स और विल द इंस्टीट्यूशन गो एंड नेगोशिएट? जैसे सपोज आईसीएमआर हो गए, जो एटलीस्ट जो कॉमन वाले फंडिंग एजेंसीज हैं, will the institution go and negotiate with them? So some of these things will need to be worked out, and probably your organization will have to take that part of it. उसके अलावा ये है कि इंडिविजुअल लेवल पे जो डील करना है, मतलब as I mentioned earlier कि there are these 8 types of well-being, and one can do various things to manage one's own anxiety. But I think a large chunk of the problem will be at institutional level, and probably that will be handled not by individual researchers, that should be handled by the society.
Okay. Sir, the next question is, how can we cope up with the discrimination at workplace?
How to cope up with the... at some point of time, there have to be people who call out that there is discrimination. Like, for example, in last year, एक intern, lady intern थी, और एक dental में there was a senior resident. They have kind of complaint about gender-based harassment. And based on that, there were an inquiry committee, and some action was taken in one case. So basically, there are bodies available, and similarly, PhD में microbiology में हुआ था, where some researchers were kind of bullied or harassed for a long period of time, and then they had complained, and the guide. The students were removed from that guide and given to other people. So if there is significant amount of bullying and harassment, the institute does respond to it if people raise their voice. And obviously, if voice is raised, then you will need the scholar bodies to support the concerned person. So it's important that the victim calls out that this is happening, and other people kind of come around the victim rather than trying to support the person who's the perpetrator. And other people in the system, like जैसे मान लो आपकी एक कोई है scientist जो बहुत bully करता है, so some of the people around that person may not be bullies themselves, and they may be ready to kind of call a spade and say कि what you're doing is not right. So if people start taking a stand, if it starts getting discussed around, it may be useful. So what I would suggest is that you should have maybe a webinar or maybe a discussion on workplace harassment itself of various kinds. And kind of get some of the administrators to attend it.
Okay, sir. And we have, I guess, last question, that is, how do we deal with our anxiety if someone around us is going through depression and societal tendencies?
Okay. Isme the best way of managing that anxiety is to take care of the problem itself. And the way to take care of the problem is, first, it is to go and talk to the person. And when you're talking to the person, one does what is called active listening. कि उसके साथ आप बैठ जाओ and you are asking the person कि okay, what are you going through, what happened, why are you feeling so low, why do you feel that things will not work out. After some time, after you've built some amount of rapport, you can even ask the person कि are there times when you don't feel like living, are there times when you feel like killing yourself. So if you get these leads, कि the person is thinking of dying frequently, let's say 3 times in a week, for example, and they are thinking about it for a few minutes together. So if it is a persistent thought, or if they have cut themselves up or overdosed themselves on 1 or 2 occasions, probably that is a time when you should be taking them to a counselor. On the other hand, suppose a person says, ki, I get this occasional idea about dying once in a month, lasts for 1 or 2 minutes, and then it goes away. then maybe the only thing you need to do is to keep talking to the person every few days. So watchful waiting is all right if there is occasional wish to die, but if there is a more persistent ideas about death or suicide, then they should be taken to counselors. The other option can sometimes be that if you feel that you will not be able to monitor, then you should activate a safety net. The safety net will include other friends of the person or their family members, or if they have any girlfriend or boyfriend. So people who he might be somewhat emotionally close to, they need to be informed that this is happening and he needs to be helped and monitored.
Okay, thanks a lot, sir. Hope no one have questions now.
I think there was a last question.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to talk with you. I would like to continue with the kind of conversations beyond this webinar, because the intent was not to give you a scholarly seminar on stress. It was more kind of a introduction to what stress is and how to deal with it in a practical kind of a way. And particularly for people who may be working at AIIMS, it is about telling you that the student wellness is not only about undergraduates, it's also about researchers. All the people who are on short-term tenure and not the permanent scientist and faculty is not a part of student wellness, but everyone else is. So actually, if you look at it, the number of researchers that come to us is fewer than the residents or students. The amount of time that we spend per researcher in student wellness is about 3 times higher than we spend with students or residents. So if researchers come, we take care of them, and it's if there are problems. Essentially, I'm requesting you to come for help, and we will try and help with many things. Like we have tried to help people with managing their thesis itself. That someone is not able to organize their writing part, or they are not able to talk with their guides because the guides are being very tough. So with various kinds of things which are practical rather than just trying to teach them how to manage anxiety or depression. So the focus is more on solving the problems rather than on taking care of. So it's not a purely psychological service. It's far more of an active resource-based service where we're trying to solve real problems directly.
Sir, one more question. If some people are not able to sleep in night, and so it is a part of the in human psychology and the part of the stress.
It can be. Again, like sleep is a multi-causal thing, but there can be like in most psychiatric disorders. I'm talking about schizophrenia, bipolar depression. All of them have sleep problems. So at one end, it can be a very severe problem like that. There can be many neurological problems which have sleep problems. There are pulmonary problems with sleep problems. So sleep can be because of illnesses, but the other side of it is that sleep can be out of poor sleep hygiene also. That a person sleeps if a person sleeps at 5 o'clock, and then just before 2 weeks before, let's say some exams, they want to start sleeping at 10 o'clock. It's not doable because the cycle has got fixed. So that is something to do with chronobiology. Similarly, if a person is very stressed and they're thinking constantly about the stressful event in their mind, they will not be able to sleep for some time. So the more psychological the stress, the issue is related to sleep, it's possible to treat them without medicines. And if it is much more of a biological kind of a problem, like some of the illnesses that I mentioned, then probably we need to use medicines to a larger extent. So for most psychosocial issues, we may need medicines for a very short period of time, and most of the time we can teach people how to sleep without medication and sleep in a way that is satisfying to them. So those are called non-pharmacological approaches. So there is something called sleep restriction therapy, stimulus control therapy. Those kind of methods can be used.
Okay, sir. It was a nice session with you. Now, it's my pleasure to propose thanks of vote on the behalf of All India Research Scholar Association and myself. I express my sincere gratitude our speaker, Professor Dr. Pratap Sharan sir, for his brainstorming session and for inspiring precious time to be with us this evening. And also, I would like to express our sincere thanks to Dr. Lal Chandru sir for conducting this interesting talk. We hope that we will continue to have such interesting talk in future also. I sincerely thank all research scholars from all over Indian institutes and organizations who have attended this lecture today. Once again, gentlemen, I thank you all.
Thank you to all.
So I would like to thank the organizers, particularly Dr. Lalchand and Monica Sharma, for inviting me here. It was a nice experience talking to all of you.
Sir, thank you for setting up